From UFOs to psychic powers and government conspiracies, history is riddled with unexplained events. You can turn back now, or learn the stuff they don't want you to know. Now we know that ecoterrorism as a concept it's not maybe quite what the name implies, because when you think of terrorism, you think of things like purposeful mass casualty events. You think of the 9/11s. You think of bombings or gassings on trains. You think of suicide bombers. The vast majority of acts described as ecoterrorism are meant to disrupt an activity. And in fact, you'll hear people who are involved in these groups and people who lead these groups saying that they intentionally avoid harming humans or animals, or that they do everything in their power to make sure no one gets hurt. But when the palm oil hits the chocolate, of course, these things can result in injuries and fatalities. Like, we're not talking about your garden variety protests. We're not talking about just culture jamming, although culture jamming is a really cool thing. Shout out to all the Discordians in the crowd today. We are talking about things like sabotage, arson, bombing. Most of the actions aren't that extreme, you know. There's stuff like tree spiking. Have you guys heard about tree spiking?
Just from reading the research on this episode, it's definitely interesting. It reminds me of, like, you know, I think there's a lot of misinformation around the idea of the Luddites or whatever, like sabotaging printing presses. It's the idea of, you know, sabotaging a supply chain or something that does not ideologically sit right with you. And I guess what you'd put things in, you'd hammer spikes in the trees so that it would damage equipment potentially.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but it's not just equipment.
The idea being that
they would get damaged.
Right. Because there are people on the other side of those chainsaws is the problem. That's the flaw in the system there. So tree spiking is exactly like you described, Noel. You sneak onto a logging site or a future logging site, and you hammer in some spikes in the trunk of a tree around where somebody would be attempting to cut the tree down. This is not going to kill the tree. It's not going to do serious damage to it, just like tapping a tree for maple syrup is not going to kill the tree. So what they're doing is they're essentially, it's like, if these trees were people, imagine if there was a way you could make everybody get an earring or a nose ring, and it meant that they wouldn't be shot in the street. That's a weird analogy, but that's almost 100% one-to-one.
And really quickly, I know the Luddites did not damage printing presses. It was like cotton mills or woolen mills and cotton gins and things like that.
I'm seeing if Matt will let me slide with that terrible analogy.
I'm still thinking about it.
All right. Well, they're not all going to be winners. We're working live, but the problem with this is, like, milling equipment could also be affected by these tree spikes. If you've had much experience with logging or with a chainsaw, you know that they can be quite dangerous if something goes wrong, right? So in at least one case, this practice of tree spiking did result in a serious injury, but not a fatality. And so far, none of the tree spiking things in particular have led to fatalities. They're meant to be disruptive.
Yeah, and it's also not led to a major change in how the logging companies continue on. You just get more equipment.
Ding, ding, ding.
Then you're essentially creating waste of large, metal-filled equipment that's just going to go into a garbage heap somewhere. That stinks to think about
too. Yeah.
If you're someone trying to do good by taking this kind of action, right? Perceived good.
Right. And then you could say, well, it's still on balance a good thing to do because I am saving some trees. Maybe the logging company will say, we don't know how many trees have been spiked. We can't check every one, so we're going to at least hold off on logging. We're going to hold off on this part of our operation. But I would argue a lot of this stuff a lot of these activities and tactics are just examples of the larger concept of sabotage, which is known as monkey wrenching. Sabotage is a cool word with great etymology. We'll leave you to discover it. There's also another buzzword I found, which I don't like. It's very rare for me to hate a word, but ecotage. Did you guys ever hear that one?
No. Is that like decoupage? Is it like making like scrapbooking?
Sabotaging stuff for a local ecological system.
You know, it occurs to me with the whole spiking thing and, like, you know, your point, Matt, about, well, they just get new equipment. Not only do they just get new equipment, they just make it harder for, like, you know, the workers. They add more security, you know, to the sites and make it more prohibitive to work there. In the same way that, like, the TSA after 9/11, like, you know, the terrorists did not win except in making us have to, you know, take our shoes off.
Which then causes the price of lumber to rise just slightly because the company has to charge more money to hire more people, which then makes the company
have
want
to
make more because it's going to be more profitable. Oh, God.
Yeah. You see the feedback loop.
Yikes.
Yep.
This is hard.
Yes. And so these actions, this emphasis on sabotage is in a very large way inspired by a novel written by a guy named Edward Abbey in 1975. The name of the novel, The Monkey Wrench Gang. The Monkey Wrench Gang follows a Vietnam vet, former prisoner of war named George Hayduke, who is trying to fight back against people polluting the southwestern desert where he lives, and he loves the land, so he has a campaign of sabotage. This inspires the creation of these real-life eco-terrorist groups, such as Earth First. You have to say it that way, because the exclamation mark's in the name.
Gerd, Earth First.
Exactly.
It sounds so nice.
So does Elf.
Yeah.
And Alf. Mm-hmm. They sound very pleasant.
It does.
Although none of it looks, none
also,
of it seems that nice when it's spray painted on the side of a trailer. Guys, I've seen numerous versions of it, just like hastily scrawled.
You know what else sounds nice? The Monkey Wrench Gang sounds like a charming Disney film from the 40s, like the Apple Dumpling Gang. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. The thing here is that those acts, those disruptive acts that are kind of in that gray area we've described, like what could be called just vandalism or a prank versus what do you call terrorism? I mean, the FBI is pretty loose with their definition of terrorism. And you could say that's by necessity. You could say that there is a financial motivation, because the more things that can be classified as terrorism, the more funding you can get for counterterrorism, right? That's another feedback loop. But there are things that are very serious, very dangerous crimes. One would be arson. ELF, in particular, the ELF, became infamous throughout the 90s and early 2000s for pretty consistent, decentralized arson, sabotage kind of campaign. It included the arson of a ski resort. And then other acts of arson were... I got thoughts on this one, guys. Other acts of arson were things like housing developments, construction sites, auto dealerships, chain stores. I want to share an example of something that has really stuck with me. And I was thinking about this while I was researching the ethical dilemmas at play in this episode. So we have a chain restaurant here in Atlanta in the U.S. called Chick-fil-A. Chick-fil-A, on pretty much a cyclical basis, will get bad press in the news because they have in the past supported things that are like anti-same-sex marriage. It's a very conservative, Christian-based chicken joint, and when this spiked again a few years ago, and it'll spike again in the future because Chick-fil-A is not really going to change, right? They've seen that they don't lose a ton of money, so they're not going to be compelled to change their ideology.
Think of all the money they could make just staying open on Sunday. I mean, they are committed to the bit here.
Right. And look, full disclosure, Truett Cathy gave me money and tons of his books when I became an Eagle Scout, and I cashed the check. You know what I mean? I was a broke teenager, so I'm in a glass house here.
Yeah, and where we live, the lines for Chick-fil-A's never go down. It doesn't matter what time it is. There's always a massive line, and they move super quickly. Those places make bank.
Yeah.
They got it down to a science, man.
Yeah, the logistics are, no shame in that. The logistics are amazing. But here's why I'm bringing up Chick-fil-A and the controversy with their political funding. There was a video that went viral of this guy who goes to a Chick-fil-A drive-thru. And maybe you guys have seen this. Maybe some of our fellow listeners have seen this. This guy goes to a Chick-fil-A drive-thru. He's filming on his cell phone. And there's this kid. She's a teenager. She has to work the drive-thru at the Chick-fil-A. And this guy is excoriating this child, screaming at this kid, making her cry because of Chick-fil-A's conservative political ideology. And that's super unfair because this kid has nothing to do with that. This kid is just like slinging sandwiches and probably wants to get an A on her geometry quiz the next day. And that's what I think about when I hear about someone's, like, you work at a dealership and the dealership gets bombed. What are you the one at the UN who makes decisions about carbon emissions? No. You mop the floor at a place that sells SUVs, or you used to. Now you're out of a job. What is that greater good? I don't know. I think you can lose humanity very easily in those sorts of situations.
Yeah. It makes me want to drill down into the Vale, Colorado arson that we described, that the Earth Liberation Front did. Specifically the one in Vale, Colorado, happened in 1998, I believe. If you find there's an independent article that was written at the time about it that goes through some of the specifics, and you learn how it's actually carried out, how they're, they were supposedly going to be timed, not explosive devices, but devices that would cause a fire to start on a gas tank. And they were set up all around this ski resort in Vale, Colorado. And it took 2 people to carry out the actual event, where they set fire to at least 3 buildings, and the fire spread after that point. There's an interesting moment in that article specifically that says the person that set the fires noticed there were human beings in one of the buildings where he had planned to set the fire, but chose not to set the fire in that building. Which kind of, speaks to the points that we've been mentioning this whole time. The attempt isn't to kill a human. The attempt is to stop a larger thing from happening. In this case, it was the expansion of this Vale ski resort out there in Colorado, because they were going to take over more of the land that was, at least according to this group's beliefs, that land should be kept natural.
It's interesting, too. There's another situation with ELF that really shows how the period you guys described, where the government was really out to get these types of groups, and they were made a really big priority, no matter what it took. There was a guy who was a member of ELF who was essentially, framed, I guess, more or less, by an FBI informant who infiltrated the group, only referred to as Anna in the court proceedings and all of that. And apparently she acted as an agent provocateur, at least according to this guy's lawyer. I'm sorry, the guy's name, by the way, was Eric McDavid. And his lawyer made the argument that this Anna, who was providing them with bomb-making information and materials and things like that, and paying for them to live, and renting a cabin for them to build the bombs in, and transportation, all this stuff, was acting, coercing them into making plans to bomb this dam, the Nimbus Dam, and also the U.S. Forest Service and other utilities in the area. And this guy got off. He served 8 years and some change, but that agent provocateur argument ultimately, convinced the judge to have him released. And that happened in 2017, after he spent 8 years and some change of his life, behind bars.
And he can't get those 8 years back. Also, check out our earlier episode, Does the FBI Manufacture Terrorists? The answer is yes, unfortunately, or certainly attempt to. The real question is the motivations and the level of awareness they had. when they were doing this. But you can, that's similar to the story about the mosque who reported an FBI undercover agent for trying to turn people into suicide bombers.
Oops.
Right.
Maybe we should have lightened up a little bit there with the coercing.
I do want to point out something that's a little bit cynical here. Matt, you noted that ELF members during the ski resort arson, one of them did decide not to blow up a building because he was worried that he would injure or kill people, right? Understandable thing. And it's in line with the stated goals of these organizations. However, there is a slightly less possible noble motivation for this. And this is something you might not know if you're not super acquainted with the criminal world, but if you are perpetrating certain acts and you already know what crimes you are going to be committing, you want to try to do your best to avoid more serious charges. That's why sometimes in robberies, right, if you see someone get shot, you'll find that some criminals will purposely shoot someone kind of like below the waist or below the knee in the leg, because then it doesn't count as attempted murder, right? Is the concept. Now that your mileage may vary, please don't mug people and shoot them. Please, just try not to kill anybody. I feel like that's a very low bar to set. Try not to kill people. But I bring that up only because I'm wondering whether there was some kind of calculus like that, whether they said, look, if we do get caught for this, we don't want to be charged with murder, right? You just have to make space for it. Personally, I think they probably just didn't want to hurt actual people. But again, it's tough to know people's inner motivations. You know who we could ask about it is Josephine Sunshine Overacre, the one who got away, currently believed to be at large in Europe, wanted by the FBI. Josephine, if you're listening, would love to have you on the show. We just have to find you. So